Welcome back to the county seat. Our topic is going to be partisan versus nonpartisan. There are pros and cons to both, and you kind of have background on the history of it and what kind of impacts it would have, but let's get the debate going. And we have joining us Mark Altom, who's the treasurer from Davis County, and Jim Winter, who's the sheriff of Salt Lake County, and they do take different perspectives on this. But so far their sparring has been very collegiate and very cordial. So hopefully we can maintain that attitude as we go forward.
He has a gun.
Yeah, and he has a gun.
Not getting beat up by the assessor, I can tell you that.
Well, Jim, let's start from your perspective. What benefits would it have for the sheriff, for you personally, if you didn't have to deal with the partisan nature of the job?
Well, I think it would have huge advantages. And again, I'll speak to the issue of sheriff because that's my current role, but I think there are broader implications. And I think that right now, oftentimes when one is out campaigning for an office, more often than not, people express the confusion at why a sheriff in the first place would be partisan to begin with. So one has to spend a significant amount of time kind of explaining why that is in place. I've never really had a good explanation for it, so that always is a little bit of a difficult hurdle. The next issue is I'd much rather have people focus on issues that I individually am bringing forward rather than the issues that they might attribute to parties in general. By placing the identifier of Democrat or Republican or Independent or any partisan affiliation on the race, oftentimes they'll bring in certain assumptions to the conversation before we ever have a chance to really get started, if that makes sense. What I'd rather do in the limited time available trying to canvass the area that I have to canvass, and that's a lot of folks, I'd rather be able to sit down and say, okay, clean slate. What am I going to do relative to law enforcement in Salt Lake County? So I think from that just basic concept, I think the nonpartisan opportunities are huge.
And the municipalities seem to work very well with that system because they're nonpartisan races.
Well, they are. I think people always still tend to kind of tacitly identify, and that's fine. But that's an advantage to tacitly identify rather than overtly identify, because again, people say, well, he leans or she leans one way or the other, but oftentimes they go a different direction. And boy, that's a refreshing approach to take. And again, we all have our certain leanings, but I don't want to be pigeonholed with the benefits or the sins of those that have a similar moniker. And so from my standpoint, it would be very refreshing to be able to go out and just talk about an issue.
Well, now Mark, while partisan affiliations bring some baggage, as Jim is expressing, to the election or to the process, they also bring some extra credibility for some offices. What's your take on that?
Certainly, I would agree. Not to disagree with Sheriff Winder, but because of the higher profile offices, such as sheriff, oftentimes the county or district attorney, and oftentimes the clerk. But for an officer such as treasurer, recorder, surveyor, assessor, generally speaking, most of the electorate don't really understand what they do, and there's no profile that's brought to the forefront and if they're doing their job. And so if you went to nonpartisan, it would eliminate part of the process right now where the decision is made on the county party level at a convention where the delegates are much more informed about what the functions of those lower profile positions are, as opposed to if it were nonpartisan, you'd eliminate the convention, go to primary where countywide in a Salt Lake County or Davis County, especially the Wasatch Front counties, there's not a lot of information of what many of those offices do.
So in essence, you're saying that the Parties Act is kind of a vetting process for the candidates to see if they're actually suited because they know what the actual job entails.
That's correct, especially for the low-profile positions. Sometimes, and we've seen examples, agreeing with Sheriff Winder on the higher profile, such as sheriff, where politics as opposed to job performance and issues sometimes come into play, and unfortunately that's not a good thing of what we have right now.
Okay, one of the things that happens in rural counties that they're very concerned with, and this is an element that's really not been flushed out at this point, is that partisan elections are subject to the Hatch Act, which has certain prohibitions on federal employees seeking those offices. And so the rural counties are concerned that if you've got a rural county where there are a lot of federal employees with, say, a land agency or something, they could run a candidate, if it was nonpartisan, put that person in, and they could start directing federal policy from their boss through their job as a county commissioner or officer. And that ends up being a legitimate concern as far as the counties are concerned. I'm just going to toss that one out on the table and see where that ball rolls.
Yes, I mentioned, when I said higher profile offices, I mentioned sheriff, county attorney, and clerk, generally speaking, but that would obviously include, in most counties, the county commission that's high profile, that certainly should continue to be partisan, or county council, depending on the form of government.
Well, you have two counties, though, that are nonpartisan and seem to be functioning okay, Morgan and Grand.
Ironically, that's an interesting issue in and of itself. Just historically, the one county made a change that was not technically allowed by state statute, and the Utah Association of Counties joined as a friend of the court with some residents of that county and went to the courts to determine the issue. Though the judge basically agreed with the position from a state statutory perspective, he refused to overturn that, which is an interesting precedent to be set in and of itself.
Okay, Sheriff Winter, you work with a county government that's council form. Mm-hmm. Do you think that good ideas that you present that come out of your office sometimes don't get the proper debate they deserve because the council is partisan?
Yes. And what I find is, the council, the people that I've been fortunate enough to deal with, all very good people. What oftentimes happen, however, is that the proverbial caucusing of the different parties. I'll find very often when I look across the table and we're in the midst of a vote that individuals would rather vote a different way, but for the alignment that has occurred because of this partisan issue. And that's an unfortunate situation. I've had people approach me afterwards and say, well, Jim, that was, I'd really like to have gone down that path, but for some discussions. To me, I don't really understand that. I don't get that kind of positioning. A man or woman should be able to vote their conscience and their what they believe is right. And again, I don't want to overstate that because it's a pretty rare occasion, really, in which something of great import is mired in that level. It does occur. Mm-hmm. My point is that from my perspective, I'd rather see that eliminated. It wouldn't be eliminated entirely. That's naive. Right. But I think it would lessen the impact. If I don't vote with my fill-in-blank party friends now, what are the repercussions?
We got about 30 seconds, so I know you want to say something.
I would have said that that happens in a nonpartisan situation right now on the city council municipal factor. They have their alliances that are not partisan. They are nonpartisan, but that same thing happens now.
Yeah.
Okay, when we come back, I want to toss out an idea. We've got just a few seconds before break, and that is that do parties help congeal thought, where you have 20 points of view and you can bring it down to one? And we'll discuss that when we come back on the county seat.
I think renewable energy and wind farms is a good way to go. We have a lot of land here to do that with, and the opportunity will grow as time goes on.
If a person wants to work in Beaver County right now, they can find a job.
I can't think of a better legacy that I could have left for my town.
The State of Utah School and Institutional Trust Lands Administration. SITLA manages 3.5 million acres of Utah lands with the express purpose of furthering the education of Utah students while promoting local industry, oil and gas, even residential development, all at the same time. Through the careful use of trust lands, we distributed more than $22 million to Utah schools last year. The State of Utah School and Institutional Trust Lands Administration, building the state's permanent school fund.